It was 30 years of having difficulty orgasming. After seeing 4 sex therapists over 30 years, found out about cannabis and I wanted to try it. Oh my gosh, it was shocking. It changed my life. People will tell me, she goes, oh yeah, as soon as I take that gummy, I can feel arousal. That has been in the research since the 70s. This is not new information. What's new is actually turning it into policy, making it law. There's research that shows that the THC in cannabis reduces the activity in the amygdala, the part of the brain that stores trauma. Women, for example, who have had trauma, sexual trauma, childhood sexual abuse, which, by the way, the number one sexual complaint of women who have had childhood sexual abuse is orgasm difficulty.
So tell us about the research itself.
387 validated surveys of women who were using cannabis. They were using it before sex or not, but they were using it. 53%, or 202 of them, had reported that they had orgasm difficulty before partnered sex. One of the most interesting things in the study, the frequency of use is
Hey everybody, Dr. Diane here. Welcome back to the lounge. I'm so thrilled about the conversation we're going to have today. I have the best guest, a new friend of mine. We're going to talk about the research she's been doing, and these studies are blowing my mind, which she sent over to me to take a look at around orgasm and female orgasm difficulty, which is a real legitimate problem, right? I've seen, and I'll be interested as I bring on this next guest to ask her about what she's seen with the stats, because I've personally seen anything as aggressive as only 15% of women can orgasm by penetration alone. And then we have other stats around 20% or so of women that have never orgasmed. And I've seen stats all over the board. So I'm going to ask our next guest about what she's seen. But the point here is this is a real big issue. And it's a common thing that nobody is talking about. And people are suffering and thinking there's something wrong with them where it's nothing wrong. We just don't have all the tools together. And the research that this guest is going to share with us around cannabis and around the use of cannabis for solving this problem and really helping women have better orgasms or their first orgasm finally after, a lifetime of struggle here. It's just absolutely phenomenal. So Dr. Suzanne, thank you so much for coming here today with me. We're going to have a great time today.
Thank you, Dr. Diane. Thank you for inviting me on.
It's really a pleasure. And I would love, because we're going to go into the research and, give people supportive ideas and tools and really help open up people's minds around this. But it's such a unique place, right? It's such a unique way of solving this problem, meaning, so much talk in the world is around testosterone and HRT and all these things. So I'm really curious, what initially inspired you really to go down very, very strongly in this world of research and exploration around cannabis and female orgasm disorder?
Well, it was 30 years of having difficulty orgasming and dealing with the shame of that and the feelings of inadequacy, the feelings of isolation, the having no place to really, at that time, in the 80s, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have Reddit where there's a thread with becoming orgasmic with 30,000, people talking about their orgasm. So after seeing 4 sex therapists over 30 years, I stumbled on, or somewhere I found out about cannabis and I wanted to try it. And it wasn't even a part of a plan, okay, let's try it and see if I can, orgasm. It just kind of, I had to learn how to use it, first of all, but we can get into all that. I'm just not to surrender, or go into a different state of consciousness. But anyway, I ended up, orgasming with a partner to my own surprise. And I was like, could that have been the cannabis? It was 2.5 hours previous. So we ended up trying, and over time, I could orgasm with or without the cannabis in different ways. And it changed my life. I mean, I sold my company in 2020. I went back for my PhD. In 2020, I graduated last year, did a dissertation. And anyway, I'll stop there. But it definitely, it was life-changing. And I know I wanted to see if other women were suffering from this orgasm difficulty and also finding cannabis beneficial.
It's so important. And what I love about your story is what you said around, hey, even using this and actually starting down the road of bringing cannabis in. It sounds like you actually found then that sometimes you could, after the induction of cannabis into your play, that afterwards you're saying that you could sometimes use cannabis or not use cannabis, and either way you would have an orgasm. So it just kind of opened that world up.
And that has been in the research since the 70s. This is not new information. What's new is actually turning it into policy, making it law that, for example, the states of Colorado and the states of Illinois have added female orgasm difficulty as a condition of treatment for medical cannabis. So we've taken the research and actually put it into society, into policy. So and why does it, why can a woman, what they said even in the 70s, it was a book called The Sexual Power of Marijuana by Barbara Lewis, who talked about women who, once they learned how to orgasm with cannabis, they didn't always need it.
Yeah.
So
I love it.
And we have neuroplasticity theory.
Yeah.
We know that the human brain, the adult brain continues to grow and change. We didn't used to think that years ago, but we know that to be true. So it's this new learned behavior. And women in my study, when I interviewed them, they said similar things. But we can go into that more detail and more in a little bit as well.
Yeah, I definitely want to. And I'm, as you are talking about, kind of the high level of the mechanism of what's happening, I know like some of what you found in research is this almost resetting of the amygdala, right? And you mentioned in your own story that you felt shame around this not being able to orgasm, which I think is a really common experience. Like that was my experience before I figured out how to orgasm, around like what's wrong with me, am I broken? That thing of wanting to show up as a woman and feel into your sexual body, but also knowing that it helps partners feel like they're able to provide pleasure, and partners want to do that. And so then there's the shame of letting somebody down and all of that messiness.
Yeah,
so
big package.
It's a big package. It really is. It's a complicated thing for sure. So what have you then found? Like it's helping the amygdala like process trauma better, or it's just kind of settling down those neurological waves, or what do you think's happening there from like that brain standpoint on them?
Great question, Dr. Diane. That's a great question. So there's research that shows that the THC in cannabis reduces the activity in the amygdala, the part of the brain that stores trauma. And that research has led to what I call the amygdala reduction theory that was published, that basically says that women, for example, who have had trauma, sexual trauma, childhood sexual abuse, which, by the way, the number one sexual complaint of women who have had childhood sexual abuse is orgasm difficulty. So, if we can quiet that part of the mind that is hypervigilant, and it's trying to help us. I mean, it's definitely trying to help us to say, we're not going to let that ever happen to you again. The challenge with that in learning how to surrender into orgasm is that, as one woman who I interviewed shared, she says, her brain would tell her, you're getting ready to orgasm. I'm noticing that you're going to be orgasming soon. And she would be telling her brain, thank you, but I'm really would prefer, thank you for that information. And if we could put that aside for now, because that's like spectatoring, that's not being in the body, that's stepping out and saying, okay, warning, that's not going to help. So long story short is the cannabis, the THC reduces the activity, and that science has shown that in the part of the brain that stores the trauma, which can allow women to relax the hypervigilance and be in their body.
Yeah. And what a great thing for the rest of our day-to-day life, right? To relax that hypervigilance and all that. It's such a gift in so many ways.
It's
Uh,
really,
Right.
I mean, it's like I could sigh, just like for the women, for example, in my study, we found who had women with or without orgasm difficulty, who had a sexual abuse history, had a more positive, statistically significant, more positive orgasm response using cannabis before sex. So it's scientifically, and there's consistency in the research over 50 years, including anecdotal research. So it's exciting to finally be talking about this, and
It really is.
ready for it.
And like you said, this stuff is it's not new from a standpoint of there's information that's decades old, but being able to have more research and newer research and being able to get it into policy, it just brings this awareness. And I think for me as a fundamental scientist, which is what I feel like I am as a doctor, what I've seen in working with patients is if I can show them the study and the research, then the belief and the ability to say, take that step to try it is so much easier. And so that's a huge part of, I think, what the offering is here too. I'm curious about then, so tell us about the research itself. What I'm curious about is, who is all coming into your studies? It sounds like some people with trauma. Are you working with people that have never had orgasms, that have had orgasms just sometimes, or they're not very strong, or they can only have orgasms through masturbation and not a partner? What have you seen kind of in all these different areas? Have you worked with these different types of
I'll focus on the research I did for my dissertation that got published in Sexual Medicine Online last year. It's called The Assessment, and I can send you a link. I have an assessment of the use of cannabis before partnered sex on women with and without orgasm difficulty. So over 1,000 women replied to the survey, and we ended up using 387 validated surveys of women who were using cannabis. They were using it before sex or not, but they were using it. And 53%, or 202 of them, had reported that they had orgasm difficulty before partnered sex. So one of the most interesting things in the study there were a number of things, but realizing that there were some women who thought they had an orgasm problem, but when we looked objectively at their responses, we found out that they really didn't. They got moved to the category where they didn't, because if they were able to orgasm sometimes or most times without cannabis, they aligned with the women who didn't have an orgasm problem. The women who had an orgasm problem, the largest group of them, almost never orgasmed without cannabis. And to my surprise, that same group of women almost always orgasmed with it. So it was shocking to see it, when I had organized the data and realized, oh my gosh, this is really, really helping women. And they learned it on their own. There hasn't really been a training. So anyway, that's those were, it improved orgasm frequency, orgasm ease, and orgasm satisfaction for women with and without orgasm difficulty. By 77% of the women for orgasm frequency for women with orgasm difficulty. I think it was over 70% for improving orgasm satisfaction, and 67, something over somewhere in there. I'm getting my numbers mixed up, but
Yeah, it's phenomenal result.
It's the majority, were able to improve orgasm frequency, ease, and satisfaction,
which is phenomenal. I mean, that just is life changing to so many people. Did you by any chance, I'm curious, did you by any chance do anything compare that with masturbation versus partnered sex? Was that a criterion there that you looked at all?
So we only evaluated, we specifically looked at the line of just before partnered sex, because if it was overlapped with masturbation, first of all, it was just the number of questions, how many questions were women willing to answer? And we looked specifically at the orgasm subscale questions, frequency, ease, and satisfaction with and without cannabis before partnered sex.
Okay. That was
because that's the largest group of women it's called situational. They call it by the diagnostic is just, the DSM-5. It's called situational FOD, situational female orgasm difficulty.
Yeah.
Which means they can have it I call it partnered sex difficulty, but it's a difficult situation.
Probably more accurate and the reality of what it actually is.
And you know what I learned too is that women who don't have an orgasm problem, they don't orgasm in all ways.
Yeah.
It's not like, because I think we're misled into thinking that, she has to orgasm through partnered, through oral sex, through vaginal intercourse, through clitoral stimulation, across the board, she has to orgasm all these different ways in order to count as not having an orgasm. No.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really silly. It's really silly, especially when we look at studies that are showing that women and their neurological systems are wired differently. And some women I've seen in studies where it's like even the G spot, which we're now calling more the G zone, is almost like hardened, where there's not as much nervous tissue that goes there. So there's idea of every woman needs to have this G spot orgasm. Well, if their body is anatomically not wired that way, that might be part of the issue there.
And I mean, I interviewed a woman, and actually she's gone public. With her story, she is her name is Rebecca Anderson, and she is the petitioner for the state of Oregon for adding female orgasm difficulty as a condition of treatment with medical cannabis in that state.
Oh, great.
And she talked about having had a radical hysterectomy following cervical cancer, whereas her cervix was removed and the upper part of her vagina and other additional reproductive organs. But that, from the orgasm perspective, that's how she orgasmed. And so she then had what they called acquired FOD, which means that she used to be able to orgasm, but she can't any longer. She lost. So we always think of women having orgasm with clitoral stimulation.
Yeah.
That's not always the case for every woman.
Exactly right.
But the point was that she started dabbling in cannabis, making cannabis suppositories, and trying different ways to use cannabis, and found new ways to orgasm through the use of cannabis. And so anyway, I found that to be not just a fascinating story, but a study had just come out last month out of the UK on women with gynecological cancers who were using cannabis suppositories, just coincidentally. I mean, here was the research. And if they used it with mindfulness, there was a more positive orgasm response.
That makes sense to us, right?
Using it with mindfulness. Exactly. Because using it by itself, they said it didn't really work, but using it with they called it mindful compassion, but having mindfulness, intention, I would say, So,
well, I think that's what cannabis can do, right? It can help drop into the body and being more present and stopping those stories, which is part of a large part of mindfulness. And the crux of mindfulness is just being present. And so I see that with cannabis. It's that's what it's like. You do have to be present. You can't be running around and cleaning your house and think that, you're going to orgasm most likely. But, from a standpoint of just being in your body, that makes a lot of sense. Now, what about, because I know some of the studies are linking pelvic pain to, and helping with pelvic pain. So can we talk about some of those studies? Because I know that's a huge problem for a lot of women.
Research now that women who have pelvic pain, chronic pelvic pain, there was a study published in the last few years. I can send you, I think I might have sent you the link to that one in particular.
Yeah.
Whereas the ability to relax the pain, and that also goes for vaginismus. I mean, I don't know, I haven't seen an actual study on vaginismus and cannabis use, but just from talking to women, that it's the ability to relax. But one must also be able in the right mindset, have the right dosage, be with a partner who they feel safe with.
Mm-hmm.
And they're in an environment that's also safe, meaning their kids aren't going to get up or come in the room, that they can relax. So creating the environment for relaxation so that the pain can dissipate. Letting the medicine do its magic, creating an environment for the medicine to work.
So then have you seen in those studies, have you seen that when it comes to pelvic pain, it's really all about, say, that acute use, that people use the cannabis acutely, and then in that moment they're less in pain and they can enjoy intimacy? Or have you seen that, hey, like using regularly over time, we can actually lead to a more like permanent reduction in pelvic pain? Have you noted the difference?
Great point. So I can share from the sexual dysfunction side versus the pelvic pain side.
Sure.
But on the Casman, there was a study done in 2020 evaluating the female sexual function index, which is the 5 domains of sexual function, arousal, desire, orgasm, pain, and lubrication. Yeah. And what they found was that women who were using cannabis more frequently were twice as likely to report like a reduction in sexual dysfunction, like 21% reduction in sexual dysfunction. So the frequency of use is definitely correlated for women to improved sexual functioning. And Dr. Becky Lynn, she did a study also. She's out of St. Louis. She's one of the few doctors in the entire country, an OBGYN, who recommends cannabis, and I think she prescribes it as well for various female sexual issues. But her study found that women who use cannabis more frequently were twice as likely to report orgasm satisfaction. So yes, the answer is yes. Its frequency of use is helping women have a reduction in sexual and an improvement in sexual functioning, which I'm going to say also would be a reduction in sexual pain.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And then what about like the arousal side of things? Like from a standpoint of, have you seen that, like if somebody is in this desire discrepancy issue, right, which we see so commonly in long-term couples, and let's say somebody is in the situation and one partner wants it and the other is not, have you seen where using cannabis can actually then like bring more of that desire discrepancy closer to the same, where it's like, okay, my partner I know is going to want to be intimate tonight, so I'm going to eat an edible or whatever I'm going to do, and then in a little while I'm going to start feeling more desire. Can it be used from a desire perspective like that in your experience?
I'm going to say yes. However, we have to make sure that there aren't other issues that are in the way, other relationship issues. So as one woman that I interviewed shared with me, she said, who was using it before partnered sex, like regularly, had shared with me, it's not a magic pill, so it's not going to take away if there's some anger towards the partner or there's issues that need to be addressed. The desire actually, we can't use it magically to make those things go away. So it has to be all in alignment with, if it's just about, okay, I need to, create some time or put the kids to bed earlier, have time for, those types of things. I mean, studies do show, there was a study done that showed that the states even that have medical cannabis laws, that there's people having more sex. And people have told me, like, doing what I do, I mean, people will tell me, like, she goes, oh yeah, like as soon as I take that gummy, like I can feel arousal, like, and they'll, just randomly.
Yeah. So what's great about being in the sex world, like people just call me, everybody's butterfly night.
And like they have permission to tell me because they know that I'm a sexologist, and I'm studying cannabis, female orgasm, and even a couple. Like I had a couple share. A husband had said to me, I couldn't. I'm going to share the words that were kind of rough in my opinion, but he goes, I couldn't get her off for like 12 years, and she said, and this is just so. Well, I'm going to say it's typical, as she says, I had a sexual abuse. I was abused as a child, sexually abused. So, but she found that with cannabis, she's able to, have a bath, for example, with a bath bomb and, use a cannabis suppository and, get, like we talked about in the beginning, calm the mind. So it's not alerting her that she's in a traumatizing situation. So
yeah,
that's something that for partners to know too, about sexual abuse. I mean, we talked about that a little bit, but it is an issue and it's still going on, the
Big
child
time.
abuse is still happening.
Yeah, I think, sexual abuse and then just any sort of or even emotional trauma around sex, even how sex was taught to us or described to us or how we were made to feel about sex. Like all of that still, like, we hold on to that. And that's where that shame and guilt and all those other things can.
Yeah. I remember my husband saying to me, "Did you come yet?" Right. And I remember thinking, to hurry? Right. I felt impatience. I remember that. That was like 40 years ago.
I've never met one woman that appreciates that question.
What'd you say?
I've never met one woman that actually appreciates that question. Like, right.
And it was just like, that is definitely not going to bring out my orgasm.
No, quite the opposite. It's like pressure and overwhelm and all those things. And then it's responsibility and obligation. And it's the opposite of what it actually takes to be embodied. And I really appreciate what you said too around, yes, it can help with arousal, but it's not the magic pill. I think that's such an important point to bring up around when we're talking about arousal disorders. We are talking about so many things. And if the relationship is fundamentally in shambles and somebody's not feeling safe and heard and all those things, maybe cannabis helps to lower the nervous system and perhaps helps to engage in those conversations, but it's certainly not going to fix all the relationship.
Those issues need to be addressed.
Right.
And because I think that cannabis, we know that cannabis use disorder exists, that people can use cannabis as a drug. And what that would mean is covering up problems instead of using it to actually have access to healing.
Yes.
Because even in developing a practice, for example, for a woman that maybe hasn't orgasmed yet or even hasn't used cannabis, I was totally against cannabis for decades. Like, it was not something that I was going to use. And having had a bad experience using it, I've talked to people who said, "Oh, I used it once and I had a bad experience." So did I.
Yeah.
In fact, in college. So being able to, like, okay, again, we go back to that, using it with intention, creating a safe environment, not having the mind obsessed with something. These are all, and it's about like self-learning, like using this as a tool to learn and unlearn.
Yeah, it's so important. And I want to get into, and we're going to talk about this in part 2. So in part 2 of this discussion, we're going to get into like, okay, suppositories, like versus other forms and delivery methods and things to watch out for. Because like what you're bringing up is, I think, a really important thing. Like, okay, well, if I tried it once and it was like scary or it didn't go well, or you've heard horror stories or whatever it is, how do you begin to use this medicine in a way that is that approachable and feels good and feels safe and all of those things? So I want to get into that in part 2. And for all of our listeners here on YouTube, part 2, you guys, is accessed by joining my Libido Club. So make sure you join that in the show notes. You'll have information on how to join that. And we'll go through part 2 on the utility of it and the suppositories and all these other great things. Is there anything else before we wrap up here that you want people to know about, like your research or some of the studies you've come across?
Just how they could access me, I guess, if, Dr. Suzanne Mulvehill on Instagram, or Women's Cannabis Project, which is womenscp.org, if they want to find out about the updated research or what states we're petitioning, how they can get involved to add FOD as a condition of treatment with medical cannabis. Thank you.
Amazing. Yeah. And we're going to put all of those links in the show notes. And you guys, I would really encourage you to go to these links, get on Dr. Suzanne's mailing list so that you can get the updated information as more research is coming out and more policies are changing to, see when this great medicine for this condition is really being supported in your state by your state legislature. So all of that, and I'm sure so much more, you will get by joining Dr. Suzanne's mailing list. So yeah, absolutely. So we'll put all that in the show notes, and you guys make sure you do join my Libido Club so you can get part 2. The FSIS, that questionnaire, I also have on my website. So if you guys are interested in checking that out and learning about these different 5 categories and how you score, you can find that information on my website. So I'll give you guys that link as well in the show notes. And thank you all for being here for another episode of The Lounge. Keep being classy out there. Keep staying sexy. And we'll see you all real soon.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for listening to the Libido Lounge. Please don't keep me a secret. Please share this with your friends. You can find me on YouTube, on Instagram, as well as how to work with me at mylibidodoc.com.